And it's the truth. You can have out of this world physical skills, but if you have a weak mindset, eventually it's going to catch up to you when that talent gap shrinks. Then that player with less physical skills develops and trains their mindset in an intentional and structured way. They will pass those players by.
Thank you for tuning in. Thank you for listening. And whether you've tuned in to elevate your mindset, your game, or just your day, you are in the right place. My guest this episode is a former Major League Baseball player, and after retiring, he founded his company Major League Mindset, which he is now the mental strength coach for the Los Angeles Angels, as well as the University of Virginia and University of Houston baseball programs. You may have seen him on the MLB Network as well. Welcome to the Elev8 podcast, Brandon Geyer. Today?
I am great, Tyler. How are you?
I'm well. We're just chatting about your journeys through some times in the major leagues. You enjoyed Colorado. Always nice to hear. Being a former professional baseball player, one of the things I was curious of what led you into post-career, the work that you're doing now.
Yeah, so to talk about what I'm doing now, I got to go back about 20 years to 2003. So I was a junior at Herndon High School in Northern Virginia. And for lack of a better word, I sucked my first 3 years at Herndon High School in baseball. I think as a junior, I hit 270 and no colleges were talking to me. Like I thought I had pretty good talent and all these other players are getting scholarships and all these awards. And I was just struggling. So a coach heading into senior year recommended a book called Heads Up Baseball, which I have both of them right here. Because they changed my life. I read that going into senior year, and it was like I didn't just read it though. I didn't want to be a librarian of this knowledge. I wanted to go apply everything. So I did, and it's given that key that unlocked that other 30 to 40% inside of me. And went off and then went to the University of Virginia after having a good senior year. And then 7 years later in 2011, when I was with the Tampa Bay Rays, Ken Ravizza was the team sports psychologist. So I got to work with him in person after reading his book, Heads Up Baseball. I said, Ken changed the trajectory of my life, and I'm sure so many others. Thank you. And then got to learn from the GOAT in person. It was just such a blessing. So grateful. But that's really what got me into what I'm doing. After that time, junior year, I became just obsessed with the mental side of the game. And throughout my career, work with different experts when it came to the mental side of the game. And then I knew at the end of my career, man, I went through this gauntlet. I dealt with anything you can think of on the mental side, fear and performance anxiety, self-doubt, all that stuff that we all deal with. At the highest level, I dealt with it. And I wanted to take advantage and give back and, combine my playing experience at the big league level with everything I learned from guys like Ken Ravizza and whatnot. And so it blessed me with the platform and the wisdom and the experience to create Major League Mindset. And that's really how we got to where we are.
Yeah, love it. Also love the Ken Ravizza story. Didn't realize that crossover there, that you got to spend some time with him. Of the people I've spoke to that got to be around his presence, they always have a laundry list of takeaways and memories. But are there a couple that stick out, especially as you talked about kind of, taking it from textbook and application? I think that's where Ken was really special in the field of getting it out of a classroom and onto the field. Are there things that stick out or things you still teach that are very Ken?
For sure. I'm glad you asked that question because I'd say two or three that really, there's a lot, but that really stick out to me. The first is using the breath. It became so important for me and powerful that I'm wearing this wristband. I'm always wearing wristbands, but when I played, I had this wristband. It says, breathe stitched into it as that constant reminder to me to utilize my breath. And that's something Ken would always say, breathe, baby, breathe. So he would talk about his breath, how, to slow the game and your mind down, get back to the present moment, gain control. The other thing he would say a lot is you have to control yourself to control your performance. And I have basically Major League Mindset. There's 8 milestones, but I boil it down to 5 principles. And principle 1 is know yourself, like self-awareness. And then number two is control yourself. And that is really a lot of what Ken talks about. You got to control yourself and the controllables so you can control your performance. And then after that, he talks about process a lot. Are you working your process? Do you have a process? Do you trust it? And are you making adjustments if and when you need to? So I'd say the breath, control yourself, and process is something that from him helps so much. And, I'm sure anyone listening to this, if they can just apply those three things, they'll notice a huge difference.
For sure. I want to dig into when you read the books as a teenager, dealing with a lot of student athletes. Sometimes they're not huge into diving into books, especially sometimes personal development books as teenagers. Um,
Mhm.
what would you tell other athletes or baseball players about just reading in general? And then, if they're searching to improve their game, their sport,
Mhm.
books like Heads Up Baseball. What would you say to kids about that,
Yeah.
what you've learned? And then I think even the next step you already talked about, the application of what you
Mhm.
learned.
Yeah. So it's really to make it simple. I think it's a three-step process. And I'm sure a lot of people out there have heard of this process. I call it learn it, practice it, master it. Nothing you don't know what you don't know, so you have to learn this stuff, whether you're reading, whether you're listening to podcasts like this, whether you're working with someone in person that trains this and can coach you on it in an intentional and structured way. You have to learn it first, and then second, nothing happens without step two. You have to practice it, get as many reps as you can so it gets to the point where it's just you're on autopilot. You just do what you do without thinking about it. And then step three, you've mastered it. You've made it your own, which is something Ken talked about a lot is, there's no the way. Find your way based on everything you learn, make it your own through trial and error. But the step one, you have to learn it somehow. So if you're not a big reader, there's a app and company called Heroic that basically they call them philosophers notes, and basically it's 6-page PDFs on the biggest ideas of all the best books out there, mental performance, Navy SEALs books, anything you can think of. I think it's a 20-minute PDF or the reading or MP3 you can listen to, where a guy named Brian Johnson, who found the company, goes over the biggest ideas. So if you're not into reading, you can listen to that MP3 and I promise you, it feels like you've read the book. So that is a great option, something like that, if you're not really wanting to read it, but then you have to do step two, like you mentioned, and we're talking about, like, you have to apply it, you have to practice it to get to that eventual mastery stage. And that's where everything changes.
Love it. It's a lot of ways to get there, like you said, and a lot of ways to learn. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
the time to learn. I think baseball is a sport where there's a lot of time, whether you're traveling in between games, in the clubhouse. Yeah, how can young athletes and young coaches maybe make the most out of that? Maybe the extra time they have around the diamond or in the clubhouse or in their locker room,
Mm-hmm.
um, to become a better team. Is it recovery, team building? What are some of the simple things that you would tell other young players and coaches to take advantage of with that time?
Yeah, I'm gonna go a different route than you might expect. I firmly believe that our physiology has a lot more to do with our psychology than many people talk about and think. So we got to get our energy, and you saying the word recovery really made me think about that. We got to get our recovery to and our energy to world-class levels. So I call it dominate the fundamentals, the Major League Mindset fundamentals, and they are how you eat, how you sleep, how you train, how you breathe, and your overall self-discipline. So dominating those fundamentals right there are going to help you build this strong foundation and get you more energized and recovered than ever. So when you're in the clubhouse, not scrolling on your phone, not on a device all the time, you're zapping your focus muscles when you do that. And it's going to be very hard to focus during a game and really put your attention where you want it, when you want it, for how long you want it. It's going to be very hard if you're zapping your focus muscles. So in the clubhouse, less screen time. Um, Highly recommend before a game, doing a little breath work, meditation and visualization, to really recharge your mind, visualize success, and really put you in a good position to succeed. And then when it comes to the mental game, I think it's, do a little, a lot, not a lot, a little. It's probably a saying a lot of people have heard. You don't need to spend hours a day on this stuff. 1% of the day, I believe, is like 14 minutes and 24 seconds. So You hear all the time, get 1% better. So just when it comes to hitting up the mind gym or the mental gym, which I feel like is meditation and visualization, 14 minutes, 24 seconds, or doing a something I have players do is a post-game reflection where you basically, okay, what did I do well? What could I do better? What adjustments will I make next time? And then you kind of grade yourself on all of the controllables to really build self-awareness. So this is, Tyler, a long way of me saying that let's get our energy and recovery dialed in. Let's take advantage of that time. Let's really, the number one way to do that is to prioritize your sleep. So, a great day today started the night before. So really dial that in. Yeah, so I would say that.
Yeah, I love you brought up the reflection. I think a lot of times student athletes I've had the opportunity to work with, when you ask them, who's their toughest critic, they all raise their hand, and then you put an assessment or reflection in front of them, and they get a little more hesitant. Which I think, hey, if you're going to be your toughest critic, help yourself out and be one of your toughest coaches too. Why is it so important, I think, to do the reflection? And then maybe if you are a younger athlete that's not great at self-awareness, going through that process to help us become more self-aware as a person and as an athlete.
Yeah, two great questions and very important questions right there. So start with the reflection. So think of that as you're cultivating a win or learn mindset. And when players of all ages can have that kind of a mindset where it's win or learn, it turns into win or win. Because if you win, boom, great. You worked hard, you had success, boom, be proud of yourself. That's like me. That's like me. Like, say you build up that self-image. But if things don't go your way, which they're not, obviously in athletics and in life, they're unpredictable and they're messy. Things are not going to go your way often. It's not supposed to be easy. So when it doesn't go your way, well, then you simply learn from it and turn it into fuel for your growth so it can help you the next competition. Then that's how it's truly win or win. So the post-game reflection, think of it like you're just leaving success notes for your future self. Okay, even if you're 0 for 4 or 4 strikeouts. First question, what did I do well? Well, if you can't write anything, there's an even bigger issue going on. If you weren't a good teammate, if you didn't, have good effort, if you didn't prepare with all you had, there's things we can always say we did well. Okay, then next, what could I have done better? Bases loaded, big at bat, my second at bat. I let the moment get to me. I didn't slow it down. I didn't do my pre-pitch routine using my breath. So I was all tense and tight, and I tried to hit a grand slam, whereas I could have done that better. Okay, so then what adjustment will I make next time? If I'm in the same situation again, I'm going to do my pre-pitch routine, and I'm going to just keep it simple. See ball, hit ball, try to hit a line drive right back at the middle, not try to do too much. So that right there is how we learn from what didn't go our way. And at the very end, we score the controllables. So for on here, I have controllables, your overall perspective, which I think is the most important. It could be, you could argue, the foundation of all things mental performance, preparation, body language, focus, self-talk, attitude, process/routines, your breath, and your overall emotions. So really going through that, it's going to, what you said, build awareness. And so then throughout the game, the more you do this, you'll think about your perspective. You'll think about your body language, knowing you can create confidence with it. You'll think about your present moment focus, your self-talk, your routines. And then when you do that, well, when you can control the controllables at a high level, it's the number one skill, I believe, for all athletes. And really, you could argue all human beings getting great at controlling because it's simple in theory, but it's hard in practice. But if you can build awareness around that and be intentional and all purpose with them, then you will eventually get to the point where you're great with them. And then pressure melts away and you play free and loose more and more consistently, which all athletes would say that's when they feel confident and that's when they have way more success. So that right there, Tyler, is how I would answer the importance of the reflection part of it. And it's not like it has to take 10 minutes. Maybe you don't even write it down. Maybe you just in your head go over it. Or if you're a youth athlete, I've worked with a lot of little leaguers too. Maybe on the car ride home with your parents, you just go over this with them. Okay, so like I do this with my young kids. Like, oh, what do you feel like you did well? What could you have done better? What adjustments will you make? Okay, let's score 1 to 10 how you were with the controllables. So that's another way how you can reflect. You don't have to write it down. And I forget what the second question was, or maybe I answered it.
No, it's just tying in the building the self-awareness and the power of
Mm-hmm.
reflection.
Mm-hmm.
I think so. Just saying, kids are often sometimes they're tough critics, but use that critique, and like you
Mm-hmm.
said, into reflection and scoring it. I love the questions that you framed. There's a great article about Bryce Young, that his dad, how he shifted the types of questions he asked Bryce at one point as a young athlete. And I think they're much more like you were saying, what did you see? What did you observe? A lot more into the things that we can control into
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
versus straying into so much of the things we can't. And you
Mm-hmm.
mentioned perspective, and baseball is such a sport wrapped in statistical failure. And how do you keep players? Routine's always so important to help us gain some of that control into our corner, into our advantage. What are ways that you help athletes, whether create routines or create
Mm-hmm.
that perspective that's going to help them to high perform?
Yeah, so at first, I love what you said about Bryce Young's dad. It makes me think of, I heard this from a mentor a long time ago, is because as baseball players, as athletes who work hard and want to be great, we can tend to be perfectionists and we can tend to bash ourselves when things don't go our
For
way. We
sure.
have these high standards and then we bash ourselves when we fall short, inevitably. And I was taught, Brandon, you bring a flashlight and a hammer to the party. So bring a flashlight. Basically, the flashlight is the reflection. Shine a flashlight on what's going well and what needs some work. Okay. And then what you're going to do about it. And then bring a hammer. But don't bring a hammer and bash yourself and shame yourself. Bring a hammer to make adjustments and to change behaviors and habits and routines. So bringing a flashlight and then a hammer, but not bashing yourself, is very, very important for athletes of all ages. And then lastly, the routines. So right here, I actually have like a pregame mental checklist that I have players, and the key part of this, I put down like 12 different options. The key is on the back of it, they make it their own. I'm throwing out suggestions, what worked for me and a lot of other players, but the key is for them to go into competition confident, energized, and prepared. They have to have it their way because we're all wired so differently.
Definitely.
So having these set routines, and basically it comes down to this. I think it's two questions that could summarize the entire program, my whole philosophy. Who are you at your absolute best? And what is it you do that helps you show up at your best? Once these players develop this self awareness and they have this identity of who they are at their best, literally like who they are, like name it. And I have a best self animal, like they have an animal that they connect with that represents who, kind of like Kobe Bryant and the Black Mamba.
Yeah.
Who are you at your best? But then most importantly, what are the qualities you embody and what are the behaviors and routines you engage in that help you show up at your best? And then it's simple. Let's do that stuff more and do less of the bad stuff, less of the other stuff. So that's really how we started, get to know themselves very well, build that identity, develop these set processes and routines that then help them consistently show up at their best, knowing it doesn't equal success, it doesn't equal results, but it equals them putting in themselves in the best position to succeed.
Right. I think that's a myth once in a while, that doing mental skills is going to guarantee success. Right. It's like, no, it's going
Mm-hmm.
to enhance our probabilities and
Mm-hmm.
likelihoods of our opportunities. You got a nickname as a player called El Pinata, the Pinata,
La Pinata,
La
yeah.
Pinata, right? For taking the proverbial one for the team.
Mm-hmm.
Was that a skill that you kind of worked on, or statistical happens chance, or a combination of both? Um, what was it?
Yeah, I would say a combination of both. With all this stuff, we can wire ourselves. We can train our mind just like our body. So I always got hit a lot in my career, but I kind of wired myself in the way where I just didn't move. And also I looked at it in a positive light. I'm getting on base, helping the on base percentage, helping the team, let the guys behind me drive me in. And if I learn how to get out of the way properly, the odds of me being seriously injured are slim. I think I got hit over 100 times in my big league career. I missed 0 games. And I know that's a little luck, but if you can get out of the way correctly, that's going to help out. But looking at it in a positive light, and really, it's never anything I went up to the plate looking to do. And I think a lot of young athletes and even older have this big fear of getting hit by a pitch. And it leads to a lot of players quitting baseball because they never get over it. A big part of that is going up to the plate, and it hurts their performance because they're literally thinking about and scared of getting hit. So they're not even, the game's already hard enough. They're not thinking about hitting the ball and doing damage to the ball. They're thinking about the ball doing damage to them. So developing a really good pre-pitch routine with using their breath and taking control of their mind with their self-talk and visualization helps so much. But no, so it wasn't anything I trained. I tried to do. I did train myself not to get out of the way. And then, a lot of lefty pitchers pitch me inside a lot. So that's why it happened.
Is there any pitcher that you in your dreams can still kind of feel one that sticks out?
One of the worst ones, man, was Charlie Morton when he was with the Pirates. I was with the Rays, and he has this nasty two-seamer, and it was coming in, but it started like middle, and I thought it was just going to be a strike. So I'm like, this hit by pitch, I actually like went into it. It hit me in my bicep.
Ooh.
And I like went into it instead of turning away. So man, that one hurt so bad. So that one of all probably stands out.
And you mentioned earlier about, your batting average in high school before you read the books, and you're working with youth athletes as well. What are some of the things that stick out when you observe youth baseball that, often steer kids wrong or maybe steer them in the wrong direction too early? Baseball is so hard. It takes a long time. And I always think, the longer you play, the more your opportunities will come. But often we put a lot of pressure on 10, 12, 13, 14-year-olds playing a lot of games and a lot of pressure, which we don't usually combat that with the mental skills and some of the things you've just talked about for the last 20 minutes, 25 minutes. But what are some of the kind of misleading things you see out there? If I gave you a magic wand, you would want to correct about youth and high school baseball?
Yeah. Another great question. I think this is very, very important. So you saying that kind of makes me think of, I like to tell a story of, it's called two players. And it's a true story and something I saw at every single level. So this isn't just youth, this is all levels. So player one, out of this world physical skills, but very weak mindset. And this player, fear more than anything held him back. Fear of failure, the fear of making a mistake, the fear of not being perfect, held him back more than anything. And because of that, he avoided adversity and avoided stepping out of his comfort zone, and avoided failure as much as possible. He focused way more on what was out of his control rather than in his control. When things didn't go his way, he acted like a victim and, would complain, make excuses, blame others, and feel bad for himself. He didn't have set routines that stacked the odds in his favor, pre-game, in-game, post-game routines. And lastly, didn't have the work ethic needed to be great or the discipline to do what needed to be done, whether he or she felt like it or not. So that's player one, out of this world physical skills, weak mindset. Player two, pretty good physical skills, pretty good, not anywhere near player one, but he got the word on the sixth and most important tool, his mindset, and what I like to call a major league mindset. So those fears, he put the work in, he became anti-fragile, where he's literally, everything that happens to him becomes fuel for his growth. And the more he gets kicked around, the stronger he gets. And the worse things are going for him, the more committed he is to his routines. And so fear went from an obstacle to now an asset. He approached adversity looking at it like a true advantage and stepped out of his comfort zone as much as possible. He focused way more, not perfectly, but way more on what's in his control rather than what's out of his control. When things didn't go his way, he acted like a warrior and powerfully responded by saying, okay, good. What do I need to do to get what I want? And then went and did that thing. Had set routines that stacked the odds in his favor and gave him a competitive edge. And lastly, he had the work ethic and discipline to do what he needed to do. Once again, whether he felt like it or not, he or she felt like it or not. So then I always ask players, which player, when I'm talking in person or whether on a Zoom, which player, player one or player two, do you think had more fun, more confidence, more success, and a more rewarding career on and off the field? And of course, they all say player two, without a doubt. And it's the truth. You
Yeah.
can have out of this world physical skills, but if you have a weak mindset, eventually it's going to catch up to you when that talent gap shrinks. Then that player with less physical skills develops and trains their mindset in an intentional and structured way. They will pass those players by. I've seen it time and
Yeah.
time and time again. So those are the things that I feel like hold back players the most or push them forward into their, true potential.
Yeah. You're making me think of a story. Marco Gonzalez. I think he pitches for the Mariners
Oh
right
yeah.
now.
Yeah.
This is when he was in college. His mother she was helping run a youth league out here, and she told a great story about the scouts that came to watch the kid he was pitching against. They weren't even there
Oh
they
wow.
weren't even there to see him. And
Wow.
while that other kid pitched very well, he had a little bit of meltdown on his teammate. He threw his glove. He gave up some hits. Marco kind of rebounded from some poor fielding and some errors to throw a couple shutout innings. The scouts, that's ended up how he got a scholarship.
Wow.
But
That's
it was,
awesome.
that same, they weren't even there to see him, but they saw someone with more talent and kind of mentally not hold it together in a high school game. And
Wow.
versus, at the time, maybe player number two was Marco.
Hmm.
But
Hmm.
I just saw he
And
had
look at
great,
the career he's having too.
yeah,
And players out there, you just never know when a scout, when a coach, when anyone could be there and just see those little things, those intangibles.
yeah,
That's what they want because they know that's going to play over the long
yeah.
run.
I think I wanted your thoughts too. I think baseball, whether you play college, you go into the minors, you move teams, coaches shift around. You get a lot of different coaches, position coaches, and things like that throughout baseball. How important is it to continue to be able to be coachable, as we say,
Hmm.
as you get so many different coaches sometimes, and sometimes you've got your habits, routines, and things that
Hmm.
maybe were resistant to some coaching. But
Yeah.
how did you navigate that as a player?
Yeah, well, I think a huge quality, I talked about it earlier, like, okay, what are the qualities you embody and what are your behaviors and routines and processes you have that help you show up at your best? So a quality that, I wasn't perfect, but I tried to embody was humility. And when I think of humility, I think of someone who high character and someone who doesn't think they have it all figured out. So to help with, become more coachable and just be coachable, it's, I kept telling him, I don't have this all figured out. Maybe what this coach says, could just say something that could really, even if I'm performing at a high level, take it to a whole nother level. So I think that the humility is everything for players. And really, an amazing book called Legacy. But I'm trying to think, James Kerr wrote it. It was detailing the All Blacks, and they basically and I think you've probably heard of it. Their mantra or their saying for their team, they're the all-time winningest team in sports history. A rugby team out of New Zealand is better people make better All Blacks. So when I think better people make better athletes, no matter what sport you're playing. So having this humility, being internally just a good person and always looking for ways to improve, then you're coachable. Then you're going to get the most out of your talent. That doesn't mean you have to listen to everybody. Now, you have to have bright lines where, hey, this guy, I'll listen to him, but maybe that's just not for me. But it's a long way of me saying I think just having that humility is crucial.
If could put you in a time machine and visit that teenage self before you read Heads Up Baseball, with what you've learned in your experience and what you teach now, uh, what one piece of advice would you want to give teenage Brandon?
Great question. When I get asked that, there's a lot I want to say. The two things I'm going to say two things because I think they're equally important. First is I have an identity. When I was in high school, especially when I was struggling, I was searching. I didn't know who I was. And I thought, oh, I'm just this baseball player. I'm the athlete. So then literally everything, when I had a bad game, it would carry off the field. I wasn't fun to be around. I had no idea. I had no sense of self. I didn't know who I was. So one of the biggest exercises I do now is called Major League Identity, is help them develop this identity on the field and identity off the field. Like we name who they are at their best on the field and off the field. Gosh, those first 3 years in high school, I would have done anything for that. Because I had absolutely no identity. And because of that, I wasn't happy. I wasn't having fun. I wasn't confident. I wasn't playing free and loose. So that's number one. Number two, man, I would tell myself, solely focus on what's in your control. I would always be so worried about things out of my control, such as the thoughts of others, the opinions of others, the decisions of others. I would let things like the umpires get to me, field conditions, weather. Like literally, I was just so focused on what was out of my control. So no wonder I was so stressed, so have performance anxiety and all that icky stuff, because I was so focused on what was out of my control. So I would say just control the controllables, and develop this identity and know who you are at your best, and what it is you do that helps you show up at your best. That's what I would say.
The teenage me would also need to hear those things. It's like you're speaking my language.
I think it's the majority of players, right?
I think different sport,
Yeah,
different career, but
yeah.
teenager me need to hear some of those same things. Greatly
Mhm.
appreciate you joining us, making some time, sharing about your career and the work you do. Um, eh, One more thing, I guess, as we wrap up, sports, baseball has so much travel, and we talked early on about, the rest, recovery, nutrition, doing some of these core things to make sure we can be at our best. Travel disrupts a little bit some of those routines and access to our food we like and their habits. What are some key things you tell athletes so that they can either adjust if they need to, or just stay on track when they're on the road with some of
Mhm.
their habits that are going to create performance?
Yeah, I think you mentioning adjust if you need to, that's huge. We got to adjust. We have to be willing to compensate, because we can't be so locked into our routines and everything that, oh man, if I don't do it, then I'm not going to feel good. I'm not going to be confident. Like we have to know that things aren't always going to go perfectly. Our schedule, we basically what it comes down to is, I actually have a sign here on my wall that always remind me. It's love what is, meaning accept reality. Like if you are playing a lot and you're traveling, your schedule's crazy, you have to accept it and then just really take some time and think about, prepare for the future, plan. If it's nutrition, packing some good healthy food and some good liquid for hydration. If it's, you might not have time to do set meditation before a game. Okay, maybe have headphones and a little audio track you can listen to on the team bus. I think those kind of little things where you look, you plan for the future, and you just know that things don't have to be perfect. Try to, and I guess I'll end with this, because this is another huge thing. This would be number three that I would tell my younger self. And I learned this from the great positive psychologist Tal Ben Shahar. He talks about there's a healthy and an unhealthy perfectionist. The unhealthy perfectionist is a perfectionist. It has very high standards and never thinks they should fall short. So when they do, they bash themselves and all that stuff that we don't like to do. The healthy perfectionist, he calls an optimalist, has the same very high standards and expectations as a perfectionist, but the optimalist knows deep down they're not going to hit them all the time. They know they don't have to be perfect because, well, they just take everything as data and they learn from it and they use it as good info and fuel for future self growth. So it kind of ties back into your question, whereas things don't have to be perfect, your routines don't have to be perfect. Yes, have them in place, but what you said, be willing to adjust and compensate if and when you need to.